Guess what? The US is ready to take on space. Well, that was the principal message of a speech made by President Donald Trump in the White House Rose Garden last Thursday. Trump branded the final frontier as the next warfaring domain and also discussed the plans to further expand its armed forces to include a 6th division with a mandate of space militarization. So does this spell the dawn of a new space race? And how will other countries react to the bold move of the US to go where no government has gone before? See what I did there? Well, here to discuss all this and more, Zhao Hai, a research fellow from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, and Einar Tangen, current affairs commentator. Welcome to you both. Let's start with you, Einar, seeing as President Trump is your responsibility for this evening.
I take personal responsibility for everything he does and says.
Good, I'm glad to hear that. We've talked about a space race since the 60s, since the 50s, in fact. But this doesn't seem like a space race anymore. This seems like a space war. Trump was talking about dominance, wasn't he?
Yeah, no, I mean, Donald Trump had a throwaway remark about having a space force. And 3 months later, he turned it into a dictate and said, well, this is what we're going to have. Actually, it's more about rebranding than anything else. There was a Space Command. It was under the Air Force, as will this be, until it is a fully formed 6th part of the armed forces. And they have 30,000 people, and they have California and Colorado, and guess what? Space Force is going to have 30,000 people, and it's going to be based in Colorado and California. So there are eerie similarities here. But what is really dangerous is in 1967, as you told me, there was a treaty, UN treaty. It left a lot to be desired around the edges. Things have obviously changed dramatically since then. But at that point, they said no weapons in space. They wanted space to be clean, not a place where you continue the Cold War, and it was all kind of greed. But now, with technology, all right, and cyber warfare being so dependent on satellites and these types of things, now all of a sudden space is being weaponized. And unfortunately, this will lead to another, if not Cold War, a space war.
Exactly, Zhao Hai. We're not necessarily talking about weapons in space. We're talking about communications. We're talking about satellites, being able to protect your own satellites. I mean, if certain satellites are wiped out for whatever reason, GPS goes, the whole world collapses, really, doesn't it? Mobile phones, etc., etc., etc.
Exactly. Many of the technologies that Einar pointed out are dual-use technologies now in the space. Normally, we use this civilian technology to survey the land, to predict the weather, or to transmit communication, and also have GPS, like geographic positioning system, to help people to have their daily lives. However, today, you can also turn that into military use, and let's be honest that the space has already been militarized. So that's why just now Einar's right to point out that Trump's behavior and his intention is actually to weaponize the space, which is much more important and much more harmful to incite a more intense space militarization and space weapon race at this day and age.
I mean, this is nothing new, though, is it? I mean, this is been operational since 1985. They've been trying to do similar things, and it was discontinued, Einar, wasn't it, during in the wake of 9/11 to reallocate military resources?
Sort of. Ronald Reagan, remember Star Wars? He was this was the next frontier. He was going to also dominate space, and this was going to be the way that you establish peace through power. Basically, we have complete control and we can destroy you at any moment, so therefore you have to do what we say. I don't know if that's peace or something else. But when Ronald Reagan went away, so did the program. The last vestiges were kind of hanging around, but they were just killed off at that point. But you know, here's the difficulty. When you say, protect my satellite, well, okay, I'm not going to weaponize space, but I'm going to put in defensive situations. Because right now they have ballistic missiles, which are called satellite killers. And there's this idea that, you know, I can fire it off. So I need to have something on my satellite that can defend itself. But this inevitably leads to a chain of you know, I can do this, you can do that, and you know, you have pretty soon a fairly sizable amount of weapons out in space. Now, and it is quite possible when you start looking at that. You know, we have hackers. We know what hackers can do, right? The thought that, you know, these things floating around and these weapons could somehow be accessed by those who should not have access and then used against civilian or military targets indiscriminately should be a little bit frightening.
Frightening indeed. And frightening too that the law governing the jurisdiction of space was formed in 1967. Mm-hmm. That has to be extremely out of date by now. How can that be fit for purpose?
That's exactly right. That's even before man landed on the moon. So yeah. I think 50 years has already passed. But that also tells you that so far it's not been updated. It's not been agreed upon among the big powers. That means so far this treaty worked for everybody and served the purpose of keeping the space relatively calm so far. However, I think the Trump administration is now trying to break that balance. And when you emphasize defense, that actually breaks the very idea of mutual deterrence. Meaning that if you increase your defense and the others cannot attack you, the others must worry about their strategic capability. They will increase their defense and also their offensive capabilities. So in that exchange, you will literally create an arms race. So I think moving forward, if you think about this, then you need to have all the big powers come back to the table and try to update that treaty and fill in all the gray areas that the treaty does not detail and describe how to do.
Einar, you've just heard it here. Everything was fine. The 1967 Outer Space Treaty worked fine until the arrival of Donald Trump.
Not quite. I mean, the fact is that, you know, technology has changed. We did land on the moon after that date. And the difficulty here, it really points to a much larger thing, is that the world is becoming more segmented. It's about who can dominate as opposed to how do we manage. And this is not just true in space, it's true in terms of trade, in politics and things like that. We're walking away from the post-World War II model when it was about building consensus and peer pressure, and now going back to a time which was a little bit more frightening.
Of course, China has now entered the space race, hasn't it, with the Chang'e landing on the far side of the moon. How significant is it for China, do you think, to have done this? Is this like it was for the United States, like it was for the USSR, as it was then? Is this China saying, I've arrived on the world stage?
Well, that's one side of the story, and also that landing is a bigger part of China's space program, ultimately trying to land also man on the moon. However, that's peaceful use of the space, and also that display of capability does not necessarily spoke for a more militarized space. So in that respect, I don't think the U.S. should take that activity as offensive in any way, trying to upset the military balance in space. Again, I think if you take not only the establishment of the Space Command and trying to upset the Outer Space Treaty, but also recently the U.S. quit the INF Treaty, and also others, if you take all that behavior together, that means the U.S. want to reopen a lot of the spaces for arms race and trying to dominate continuously in those areas to protect its own interest, regardless of other people's interest. So I think that's the problem. That's why I think only the Trump administration started this, not just because of the technology, because technology continued to grow, to evolve, but no other U.S. administration so far at this point tried to break this balance in previous agreement. They would like to probably update that and restart negotiations rather than take that unilaterally.
I would argue that Reagan and his Star Wars was a similar attempt to do that, also not very well thought out, also doing exactly the same kind of things that you're talking about. And the reason I bring that up is I think that Donald Reagan was a big fan of Donald Reagan. That was there's a Freudian slip if there ever was one. Donald Trump, yes. Donald Trump was a big fan of Ronald Reagan. He tries to compare himself sometimes to him. I think a lot of the ideas that he had there, and this is perhaps where this Space Force idea came out. He's Donald Trump. He's constantly looking for some way to brand something with his mark.
There's something that doesn't feel right for me about this. bearing in mind that they say that by the year 2030 there's going to be more plastic in the ocean than there are fish, that the coral reefs, the coral in the ocean is dying out virtually completely. The Amazon, which supplies anything up to 20–30% of the oxygen that we breathe, is on fire at the moment. They're saying that within 10 years we will have gone past the point of no return when it comes to climate change. Is this a priority, to be putting more things into space?
Well, it's America first. It's making America great again. That's exactly what Trump wants to do. And he's restoring, or probably learning from past history from the Reagan administration, trying to restore Space Command, or having more missiles, having more arms, I think, for the United States. But he's not thinking in protecting the Earth or trying to solve the problem of climate change. I think that's not his administration's priority, nor himself. So I think that's fundamentally the problem. And excluding the U.S., other countries in the world trying to get together and continue to stress this problem, as we have seen in the G7 and G20. However, I think without a major player like the U.S. Playing a major role in this, it's very hard to solve the problem that you described.
Yeah, but you know, we have to remember this is the time of Donald Trump, but there will be a post-Trump reality. Things will go on. Just you know, we're looking at this Category 5 hurricane, which Donald Trump didn't even know existed, except he said that on 2 occasions before, which is a bit odd. These types of things are convincing people that the world is changing, and regardless if it's man-made or not, the issue is, what can we do to address this? Or are we just said, well, if we go extinct, we go extinct? I think people are going to wake up to that. I think the next presidents and leaders of the world will be forced into a situation where people say, no, this is a priority and you do have to work together. That's the danger of what I see with Donald Trump, is this, he is trying to separate everybody and say, you know, just do your own national good. This is where Bolsonaro is also saying, he says, hey, this is Brazil, it's none of your business. What happens in our business, our area, if we burn off all the Amazon, so what? That's not your business.
Because at some point, fairly soon, people like Donald Trump and America are going to have to stop looking after themselves and looking at dominance in space and start working together with other countries to save the actual planet we live on.
Yes, but I mean, Donald Trump's strategy is to spread uncertainty. He likes to brand things. He likes to make you guess what he's going to do next. His presidency, if you look at it dispassionately, is just a rerun of his show, you know, The Apprentice, except America is The Apprentice, and they don't know when they're going to get fired. So in this particular case, but he's not going to change. He's a climate change denier. He is every day.
Chinese hoax, according to Donald Trump.
Trump is all about building a wall, you know, not only between the United States and Mexico, but between U.S. and other countries by tariff, between U.S. and others by you know, space and cyber warfare. So all kinds of things. It shows that there's no deep understanding of 21st century where countries are interdependent and interconnected, and we need to work together to, you know, facing all those challenges as you described. And I think right now, individual countries, if separated and dealing with those problems individually, they will fail, and we will have to face those consequences.
We've slightly got off the topic of the space race and space war, but that was my fault. But gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed. Zhao Hai from the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, Einar Tangen, current affairs commentator. Thank you both very much. Well, that's it from this edition of The Point. As always, don't forget you can follow us on Facebook. We're there on Twitter as well. The handle is The Point with LX. Download the CGTN app as well. You can watch the show as many times as you like on your mobile devices. Go to YouTube as well. We're there. In fact, we're everywhere. We're even in space. Thanks for watching. You've got The Point. Bye-bye.